Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, it's morning when you're listening to this. I'm really excited to welcome Tyler Shores to the episode today, who is a manager at the Think Lab program at the University of Cambridge. He's done research in the past on reading on print and on screens, talking about digital distractions and attention spans. He currently is looking at digital well-being and the role of technology in our everyday life. And in the past, he's worked at Google, at authors at Google, and a manager in digital education at Stanford University. Really cool to have you, Tyler. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you, and thanks for inviting me along.
Absolutely. I really want to kickstart this conversation and really dive deep during these 25 minutes to talk about digital well-being. So maybe you could just, because there's so many interpretations and meaning out there, what does it mean to you based on your experiences and your research?
I mean, yeah, digital well-being, especially I'd say within the last year, has kind of expanded or inflated to mean a lot of different things. One of the things I'm interested in, and again, there's people are going to define well-being and digital well-being in different ways, but I would say just being cognizant, being very mindful of your quality of screen time as opposed to quantity is one of the things, and then really especially now. I mean, my own understanding of digital well-being has shifted quite a bit since lockdown in the past almost a year or so, where not that long ago, we were talking about screen time in terms of absolute quantity, in terms of, it's like, is it bad for us to be spending all these minutes and hours online? But now it's a question of quality. So it's not a question of like how much time we're spending on screens, which is kind of unavoidable in some ways. But now it's like, how do we make the most of the time we are spending online?
Yeah, and literally picking that up, thinking about all the students who are now, their school is online, and they have to. So how do we start to kind of compare or kind of quantify the differences between when they're online to study and be engaged with in a classroom, or to be online on social media and online to be interacting on a social perspective? So it's all getting mixed together. Our lives are so much more on screen. So maybe that's a really kind of important kind of point to pick up on. Now that we are at home, sometimes some of us aren't around our family members, and we need to be engaging, and even for our own kind of mental health and well-being, we need to be interacting with human beings, and digital is the only way to go. How do we balance this all?
I think one thing to keep in mind is that it's our habits and behaviors have changed online, but it's also some behaviors I think have become amplified more since lockdown, and because we're spending so much more time online. I was just talking to a colleague of mine about that. We were talking about Zoom fatigue, which some people might be familiar with, and it's just the idea of when we're doing this kind of video and having to be engaged and being present and being aware of ourselves being in the spotlight so often. It's tiring for a lot of reasons. Some of my research gets into digital distractions and multitasking behavior. So we know multitasking behavior for the most part, and we kind of all do it. Like I've been actually kind of wondering whether for myself or other people, are our habits starting to slip, are kind of, like our digital etiquette a little bit, because we're starting to get used to things becoming a little more, I don't know, what's the word to describe it? Just like we're more prone to multitasking. I've done it. Like I fully admit in terms of like long meetings that are an hour, and I'm like, how's my post doing on Twitter or LinkedIn or these sort of things? That contributes to the fatigue. So it's also like, it is a question of like being a little bit mindful of some of those behaviors, and like, do I have to check this right now? Since we can't meet face to face, I certainly would never do that face to face if we were talking together. But it happens. It happens to all of us. So it's not like a good thing or a bad thing so much as just something to be aware of.
It's so true. We're so often like, and I actually have a really strong feeling about it when I'm speaking to someone and I can tell that it isn't a conversation where I'm getting their full focus on. I kind of like veer off and often end the call or end the conversation earlier than needed to be, which is probably not the right way to approach it. There's so many other things that are going on. But how do we deal with it? Because the other aspect of it is that we're also looking at kind of like, I don't know what percent of my body is visible on screen right now. sometimes I can use my hand gestures, which I'm trying to exemplify right now. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes my voice is carrying, sometimes it doesn't. There's so many kind of physical attributes that we're changing about ourselves. We're being more expressive sometimes by using our facial features more to be able to explain what we're feeling at that moment. And it is tiring. I have to say, after like fewer meetings, I can get more tired online than actually going out and being around people. Had again, I'm just kind of raising points, and I don't really have a question, but like I just want to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a common experience for a lot of us. I know, for example, I feel like it just takes a little more cognitive overhead to, be present online, to actually think through things. If you've ever, had to present in a meeting or talk or been part of a group, there's a little bit of the ambiguity, right? If people don't have their cameras turned on, at least I feel it. And I was like, oh, if I try to make a joke and then I get no reaction from a crowd, I was like, that either means I'm not funny or it means like nobody's really paying attention. So we kind of feed off of those small little moments of social interaction too. So we're missing some of those things. And then to the point you had about kind of like feeling less engaged, like it is a two-way street. So I was thinking, it was Sherry Turkle, who's at MIT. She had an interesting study that she'd done a little while ago, but it was just the idea that like for in-person interactions, just having the phone, the device visible within arm's reach, say on a table or something, was enough to kind of stymie some conversational depth. And the thinking behind that is that just the mere presence of like, I don't want to get into a long story because you might check your phone or you might be half paying attention anyways. And so the idea is that I was like, well, like, on some level, I'm realizing you could pick that up and like, disengage at any moment. I don't have your full attention. Translating that to the online context, we're all kind of like that at some point. I kind of wonder, like at any second, you might do the, the eyeball flit and it's like, what am I checking right now? And like that sort of thing. It's like, oh, I've already lost him. Okay, I'll wrap things up in that. So that's tough. That's like, something for us to think about as listeners and to speakers. It is what it is. It's probably not going to change anytime soon, but I just wonder, like, I feel like we're all in this giant social experiment right now where we're all thrown into online stuff and it's kind of changing as we go.
Yeah, I want to, like, obviously right now it is an even more kind of extraordinary time. But in general, we've been like social media has been such a big part of discussions about mental health and well-being, especially for young people. Even the past like 5-ish years, it's really getting the momentum it truly deserves with the impact it's having. And maybe I want to know both side of things, like the pre and post world that we've lived in. And your research was already on social media and how it affected young people. So what did you find, and how is it? How do you see the world transforming or transpiring into as it continues to be present even more in our lives?
Yeah, let's see. It definitely has changed. My research has kind of changed and shifted focus a little bit over the past, year or so. One of the main things I'm interested in addition to social media, is also our reading habits. And reading means a number of different things: reading books, reading articles. I can say, like, just from some of the research I've done and looking at what's become in the field, that it feels like we're getting more distractible in terms of, and again, this depends. I almost feel like we need a taxonomy of like what counts as distractions and these sort of things, that there's a difference between like looking at the phone just to see if there's any notifications. That's like a light distraction in my mind, as opposed to looking, checking, and then getting sucked in. That's a longer distraction. I would say anecdotally, I've seen stuff, I can't remember the study off the top of my head, but screen time and check-ins are up, over 100%. So they doubled during COVID, which makes sense when you think about it, because we're all kind of scared and all sort of like looking for news during all of that. So there was a little bit of that sense of like, we need to check things more. So the external circumstances and how we respond to them were a big factor. During the election day stuff in the US, where, that was a day by day thing. I fully admit my phone check-ins probably went up 1,000% that week, because that was just me like refreshing the news things in terms of, U.S. state elections and poll results and all of this. So yeah, that was, kind of part of it. I've seen huge spikes in my own behavior. I use Screen Time, and I use the In the Moment app on iOS devices just to give myself a baseline. And I think that's a good, just quick tip for anyone that's listening to this now and is kind of curious. Like, forget what the numbers are necessarily. Everyone's mileage is going to differ, but just like having a good sense, try it for a week to actually see like what's an average number of times that you check your phone, average number of times you check into a specific app during different moments of the day, and just getting a sense of what your everyday habits are like. I feel like that's a good step. And then just deciding for yourself, forget what I say or what some news article says, like, what's considered a healthy amount of time for you. If it's, I spend 30 minutes on the news and social media first thing in the morning and actually feel really stressed out when I do that, that can be a good example of like, okay, this doesn't seem to be working for me. Could I tweak my routine a little bit? So, I guess what I'm suggesting in all of this is that we should all kind of be self-scientists, in the sense that it's like, yeah, so we're all kind of experimenting on ourselves a little bit, collecting some data and seeing what actually works, what isn't working, and what could we maybe do about some of these things.
Tyler, this is so powerful, and it takes me back right to the beginning of the conversation where you said mindfulness, and it's so much more about being aware of what we're doing than actually being pushed down by, more social media articles telling us that, hey, you should be spending X amount of time on this or that. So it's like, I'm just listening to you and I'm like, things are just starting to click together. Yes, that makes so much sense. For someone whose job it is to do a certain task online or be present, you just can't put them on the same scale and, compare them. It's so much, it's again, there's that like pressure and I guess this existed on the schoolyard, peer pressure. Now we're feeling it through social media, and I mean in both in the well-being sense, where people are posting about being healthy or being out there, being active or traveling or reading. You still get posts and notifications. LinkedIn is a great place for that. You every so often you'll find out, oh, my friend is now in a new job and doing this or that.
Yes.
And you're feeling a little bit fear of missing out. You're feeling a little bit like you're not good enough. You're losing self-esteem. I'm kind of like kind of mixing everything up in my kind of rambling as well. I guess what I'm trying to get to is what do we do as young people? And again, this isn't it's like, I'm going to say with a pinch of salt to say that, hey, this isn't like concrete advice that's only going to work for you or not. But like, what are things that you've seen or experiences that you've been through that can help maybe guide us to being more mindful about our practices, not just online, but our kind of overall day-to-day life, because it is so deeply interconnected, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll share actually right now, and for people that hopefully we can share this online later on YouTube, but I did a blog post where I talked about just some like 5 quick tips on managing our digital distractions. And these are just easy things that anyone could kind of do right after listening to this. Simple stuff like kind of just keeping your devices a little bit out of sight, out of mind can actually make a difference. But building in quiet time too, I think, is really important. I've been thinking about this more both for my research and writing and teaching purposes, but wasn't that long ago when news wasn't omnipresent. Like with the advent of CNN, and we're talking about the 90s at this point, which kind of shows how old I am, but like the 24-hour news cycle is a relatively new invention, like for a lot of us, in the sense that most news nowadays isn't new news. It's just kind of like pushing it out there in terms of like there used to be a time, for example, where the news was in the morning and then the evening. And that's when people would do their news consumption and maybe a newspaper on the side. Now that's totally become anytime, any place. And that's good and bad. Like, we like that sense of being connected, but I would say just be mindful of some of these things. And this applies to a lot of stuff, actually, but building in the quiet, non-digital times can be really good for us. I would even say schedule some of these things, like schedule in some quiet time and just see if that makes a difference. I'm still, I've been a, kind of a big book reader, bookworm kind of person forever. And I remember specifically when I used to work in the tech industry in Google, I felt my leisure reading time going down like this. And yeah, it was because I was spending more time online. It was actually making me feel less good. It's sort of, at least for me, this is a personal anecdote more than anything else, but I felt like something was missing, and I was missing the pleasure of just being able to unwind a little bit and to actually be able to like lose yourself in a good book. So that's like a mini tip, I guess, in terms of people. If anyone out there listening is concerned about, oh, my attention span, and I can't for the life of me, like, focus on one task for more than a couple minutes, reading or audiobooks or whatever form, doesn't matter what you read, just read something and like let yourself just kind of get lost and immersed into something can be a really good thing. I think it's a very relaxing experience, at least right now, which we kind of need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I again, personal anecdote, but I've had to start doing this for myself as well. I found, especially during these past few months where I've been at home all day, that it's feeling like I have more time than ever, but I'm not writing or reading or doing anything. And so what I've done actually is, again, something that I do and very personal, but it could be something relevant to others as well, is keep my phone away for at least an hour before I go to bed. Put my alarm on, leave it on the side. Try to not keep it in my room even if it's possible. And just have my Kindle and read late into the night. And then in the morning as well, I try to wake up, not touch my phone until I've read in another language actually for over 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then actually look at notification and stuff. Because as soon as you open your phone, it can affect your day so much, whether it's a good notification or bad, someone who's messaged you back or not, whether it's good news or not. And it can, like, from the get-go, I don't know if you've done any research or have any, because I know of a piece of kind of thing that I read a while back, but our brains are most kind of like a foam, like ready to absorb really cool, new, and interesting stuff right at the start when we're fresh out of deep REM cycles of sleep. And that piece of kind of information stuck with me. I can't find the exact details, but like it made so much sense to then be kind of making those initial moments almost meditative and almost being aware of everything around us as we start the day.
I think so, yeah. I think if there is like, maybe one small piece of advice that sounds small, but that's actually really big, that I've learned over the years, is that it is exactly that. Like, our mornings, the advice was basically do reactive work later, do your own, self-focused creative work first, whatever that means. For some of us, that might mean reading. For some of us, that might mean writing. And the idea behind that, there's a couple reasons why this makes a lot of sense, is that, so reactive stuff would be like checking your emails, checking your notifications, and these sort of things. I really recommend it. And, it's easier said than done. It might take a little while to actually break this kind of ingrained habit, but try it and see if it makes a difference. Like when you're not fully awake, if like the first thing you do in the morning is pick up your phone and check it, and you see some stressful thing, or like, oh crap, I have to reply to this email, but I'm not awake enough to reply to the email yet. That's kind of a lose-lose situation, because you're stressed out right off the bat. You're thinking about these sort of things, and you're sacrificing your morning routine time. So even for people that aren't necessarily a morning person, I'm not really a morning person, but like, kind of like letting yourself like ease into the morning and have your own thoughts. Because for a lot of people, we are fresher and our heads aren't necessarily cluttered. It's worth trying. And I have a few ideas, like practical tips, but like you mentioned, those are really good ones too, is like, don't put the phone, like, put your device anywhere not within arm's reach or wherever you are. The vast majority of people, at least from my own research, like it's got to be close to 90% at this point. The last thing to do at night, first thing in the morning, is touch their phone in some way. And that's because, like, the alarm clock app ends up being a bit of a gateway drug gateway app in this sense, because it's like oh, I have to check my alarm, or I have to set off my alarm. And then immediately that becomes like, oh, there's a notification. Let me just check this. And then 5 or 10 or 15 minutes goes by during that. So it's a temptation thing. So in a practical sense, use an alarm clock, like an actual alarm clock that's on a phone. See if that makes a difference for your morning routine. I do. It does help because it removes that temptation of actually like, having the phone really close by. So I'd recommend that for just about everyone.
Yeah, simple but really, really powerful. I found similar. I found it to be make such a big impact on my day-to-day, even like emotional well-being. How I feel like when I get up. Sometimes I feel so much like weather is a big thing for me. So when I look up and I don't see the sun, it's like, oh man, this is gonna be another cloudy Cambridge day.
Yes.
But but this is a big part of it as well. There's another kind of facet I wanted to explore with you, Tyler, which is about reading and writing. Well, more reading, I think, and that it was a big thing that you were doing back at Google as well. We are probably reading more than ever before. If we consider chat messages to be reading and YouTube comments to be reading as well.
Yes.
But at the same time, we probably aren't reading, habits of like reading, proper spine books and stuff like that is also dying out. So what, I guess I just want to like kind of give you that as a prompt to talk about like reading and our habits that have been transforming.
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated one. I'll kind of give like a few overview things in that. Yeah, it does feel like book reading, like since the pandemic, there's signs that our book reading has gone up in the sense that we have been kind of turning away from news a little bit or having digital fatigue. So print reading in particular might be on the rise. I feel it too. I have my Kindle and I use my Kindle for leisure reading for a lot of it, but sometimes I just think better in print, I guess, in terms of like sometimes I just want to break from screens. And for me, paper books are the best way to do it. The attention span question in reading is very interesting too, because by that logic, and this is what we've been thinking about for several years, is that if our attention spans are getting shorter and we're not liking books as much, shouldn't books be getting shorter? Shouldn't short stories be becoming like the dominant genre in these sort of things? And it hasn't been the case. There's still 5, 6, 7, 800 page books, which are actually doing quite well. So it's a weird sort of, it doesn't necessarily follow these two things, but these are interesting parallel trends. It's a bit like binge watching. Binge reading almost seems like it could be its own phenomena in itself. For those of us that are really engaged with reading, we like the in-depth immersive experience more, but that's a complicated one. And especially when we factor in that audiobooks are super on the rise. I like audiobooks. I prefer fiction audiobooks as a way to kind of pass the time or maybe listen during a walk when it is sunny out and these sort of things. So you're right. Like our encounters with like, text written words is certainly on the increase, but like we're just, we're diffusing our attention span over many different kind of textual encounters now, as opposed to like, just getting lost in one book or one long article or these sort of things.
Yeah. What was your work like at Google? Because it's kind of cool to hear from an insider, right? Like what were you working on and how has that transformed you? Because then you went on to do a PhD in education at Cambridge and now you're working at the university. So you've come from a very startup-y, very, big tech environment to a very academic environment. And how's that affected you?
I would say my experience at Google did eventually fairly directly lead to my PhD, because that's when I really got interested in some of these questions about our digital habits, the way we think about work and free time. I can share when I first really noticed it was a thing was, Silicon Valley, just to give a sense, very fast-paced, very different than the academic, lifestyle and pace of things in general. But I remember, and I am old, I guess, but I remember when the first iPhone came out, when Jobs made the announcement and everything. I feel like almost immediately the expectation changed of being online and present, because it used to be emails and everything, but once you had an iPhone, it was well, even if you're not at your desk or whatever, did you get my email? Did you get my text message? I sent it a minute ago. That really changed. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that was that expectation of always being on was very tangible. Now it's reality for all of us, but Yeah, I remember that. I remember that changing fairly dramatically, and I felt like the pace of life sped up on all of us. But
Yeah.
that being said, working at Google was pretty cool. The fact that you kind of get to be at the center of the universe in terms of all things digital was really neat, and it's fast paced, and it required a lot of it's a bubble, I guess is the best way to say it, both in a good way and a bad way. Cambridge is a bubble. All universities are a bubble, but Silicon Valley was a bubble in itself. That what I mean by that is certain tech behaviors and things, and being able to try the newest apps and the newest hardware and these sort of things felt like just like what everybody did. That could be a whole nother talking about working in the tech industry in Google.
I know, and we have got to the end of our episode. Maybe we should get you back and talk about tech startups and how you transform from a techie to an academic person. But we are at the end. And before we go, though, I really wanted to, because you've given us we've talked a lot about kind of more holistically, but also given some very granular and more practical tips, like, keeping your phone away, just being self-scientist about how we monitor our behavior online, being patient with ourselves and being careful, not pressurizing us to feel like we need to be, exercising 3 times a day and going out for 2-hour-long walks so we can be a bit more okay with ourselves. But before we go, I wanted to get a final piece of advice from you, or something that kind of condenses your research, your experiences in industry, and what you're looking at right now, into something that might be something useful for students.
Yeah, let's see. This is really meant as a general piece of advice, but I think it's very valuable to think about. With teaching, with research, and all the things that I do, I often talk about digital productivity and digital well-being together, and they absolutely are together. You need to have the well-being part in order to be productive. It's not one without the other. So I just want to make sure that we talk about productivity and these sort of things. That also includes taking breaks. That also means taking care of yourself, so you're not kind of just burning yourself out and all of that. So that would be my advice. Think about these two things as of one same piece. The idea that, even the well-being stuff actually it should come first at this point. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to be able to kind of maybe it means taking it easy on ourselves, feeling guilty about, why am I not getting more done? When I have all this free time, because it's hard. Everything's really hard right now. So prioritizing well-being and how we actually feel and making sure we're okay will lead to the productivity part. So that's a general closing thought.
Amazing. I love it. Productivity and well-being together.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tyler. It's been really, really cool to have you, and hopefully we'll have you again sometime.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Nice to chat.
Have a great day.